Alright, what is up, you guys? I am here with the 2019 WWE pay-per-view ranking. So this is from worst to best, of course, and this was an easy list to put together in terms of worst pay-per-views, but look, to be honest, this is a shame, but I don't think 2019 saw a great WWE pay-per-view. The number one I have on this list, I would just say, is a good pay-per-view. It's good for 2019. But, 71 about 2018, at least we had some really good pay-per-views in 2018. The Royal Rumble. And, yeah, that's all I can think about at the moment. But, hey, at least we had Royal Rumble 2018. So, yeah, let's start the list off with dead last, Super Showdown. This was just, it's these Saudi Arabia shows, man. We had the Snooze Fest Battle Royal. We had Triple H versus Randy Orton, which was okay. Let's see, we have Kofi Kingston versus Dolph Ziggler. Seth Rollins versus Baron Corbin for the Universal title. It's just, nobody wants to see these matches. And then we have your main event. One of the worst matches in recent memory was The Undertaker and Goldberg. That was a disaster to the worst degree. I think the only good match on this card was Andrade versus Finn Balor. That was actually good. Next up, I'm going to put Crown Jewel, which is not on DVD yet. Look, this Tyson Fury nonsense, that pissed me off, man. Tyson Fury and Braun Strowman, and then we had Cain Velasquez and Brock Lesnar. I don't like celebrity involvement. I don't like any type of outside involvement. Especially, Cain Velasquez, who gets just this big spot against Brock Lesnar. Money talks, I know that. Saudi shit show. I'm sure they wanted Ultimate Warrior and Eddie Guerrero, and they couldn't deliver on that, so they're like, oh, hey, we'll give you Cain Velasquez. So, yeah, it's, I don't want to see Cain Velasquez anymore. I sure as fuck don't want to see Tyson Fury at WrestleMania next year, but we all know it's going to happen. But yeah, this was just an awful pay-per-view. It's probably my least favorite pay-per-view of the year. I don't think it's worse than Super Showdown. But, we had the main event, which was The Fiend winning the title, which I don't think he should have won the title. He should have held off until maybe next year. Keep him undefeated and, give him the title down the line. Next up, Hell in a Cell, 2019. We have a really good match with Becky Lynch and Sasha Banks, their Hell in a Cell match, which was the opener of the show. So that was really good. Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan versus Luke Harper and Eric Rowan was decent. Other than that, we ain't got much going for this pay-per-view. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to put this dead last. I can't, because we do have some acceptable to good matches here. But, of course, we did have the Hell in a Cell finish, ending in a no contest / no disqualification, whichever the hell it was. It's a fucking Hell in a Cell match. For the second year in a row, you have it end with screwy fashion for no reason. The most barbaric match of the year. Okay. Next year, don't advertise it as the most brutal match of the year, because we all know it's not, because it'll just get a ref stoppage if it gets too violent. Next up, we have TLC 2019. This was kind of a snooze fest of a pay-per-view. We had the Revival and the New Day in a good tag team ladder match. Baron Corbin and Roman Reigns TLC match was just overbooked and honestly boring. Did anyone want to see that? And I still, to this day, I grew up with a very much different product. I'm almost 24 years old. I've been watching since I was very, very little. So, TLC matches to me, you always had to grab a belt or grab an item off the hook. I don't think they should ever end in pinfall. And then the main event, the Kabuki Warriors versus Charlotte and Becky Lynch, that was a mess. That was an awful TLC match. Next up, we have Clash of Champions. we had kind of the big storyline going in here with Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman. They were tag team champions, and then they faced each other for the Universal Belt. We had Kofi Kingston and Randy Orton in a somewhat acceptable match. We had, Charlotte versus Bayley. And then we had Becky Lynch versus Sasha Banks in I thought it was a decent match for the Raw Women's title. But, yeah, really just kind of one of those so-so, almost feels like a house show in a way. But at the same time, it has that pay-per-view feel, I guess. Speaking of house shows, next up we have Stomping Grounds. This turned out to be 10 times better than anyone expected. We had Becky Lynch versus Lacey Evans. We had Dolph Ziggler and Kofi Kingston in a steel cage match for some reason. We had Roman Reigns versus Drew McIntyre. And then, of course, Seth Rollins versus Baron fucking Corbin, because everyone wants to see that. Like I said, this pay-per-view wasn't as bad as everyone thought it would be with the title Stomping Grounds. How good could it really be? But it ended up not being terrible, so that's good at least. Okay, now we get into some of the more so-so pay-per-views. Next up, we have Elimination Chamber 2019. We had the women's tag team titles being introduced, and now they mean absolutely nothing. Even at WrestleMania, they felt like they meant absolutely nothing. We had Ronda Rousey and Ruby Riott in a very, predictable. Obviously she wasn't going to lose. So, Finn Balor and Bobby Lashley. And, this is kind of, honestly, a one-match show. And I mean a one-match show as in a great main event. Your Elimination Chamber wasn't even supposed to happen this way, and it ended up being, to me, probably the best main event of any pay-per-view this year that I can remember. So yeah, that was, Kofi Kingston and Daniel Bryan, they put on one hell of a show the last 10 minutes of that Elimination Chamber match. Next up, we have Money in the Bank 2019. So, obviously, we had the 2 Money in the Bank ladder matches. We had Bayley win one, and then Brock Lesnar win the other. People were losing their shit when Brock Lesnar won. Obviously, it ended up meaning nothing. They should have just given it to somebody else. But what can you do? And then we had AJ Styles and Seth Rollins in a just kick-ass match. That was one that I was actually excited to see, which doesn't happen very often for WWE anymore, for me to actually get excited for a match or a pay-per-view. But, this is kind of a guilty pleasure. I think Brock Lesnar winning is more comedic at this point. It's hard to care anymore and get angry. It's just more comedic. And I have a soft spot for Brock Lesnar. I think he's a great performer when he wants to be. And plus, we did get the boombox moment out of this. So, can't go wrong there. Which was one of the worst things I've ever seen, but at the same time, one of the greatest. Speaking of, we have Fastlane. Usually an awful pay-per-view, but we actually had a surprisingly acceptable Fastlane pay-per-view. I think this is Dean Ambrose's final pay-per-view match, or Jon Moxley, whatever you want to call him now. So yeah, that was kind of your big building spot here. The Shield, their final time together, even though they had a fucking network special. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of the Shield, but this was an epic main event. And I think this had a good build to WrestleMania. We had, of course, the Shield facing Baron Corbin, Drew McIntyre, and Bobby Lashley as your main event. We had Daniel Bryan versus Kevin Owens and Mustafa Ali, which was a decent triple threat. We had women's tag team titles, the Boston Hug Connection versus Nia Jax and Tamina. So, and then we had the whole Kofi Kingston versus The Bar. That was terrible. But other than that, this was a surprisingly good pay-per-view. Next up, we have one of my least favorite pay-per-views of the year. To this day, I still really don't like it. But we have the Royal Rumble. Obviously, it does deserve a higher spot on the list here. I think this is number 5. So it is one of the top 5 pay-per-views of the year. You had Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles in a very disappointing match. Both Rumble matches were a bit cluttered at points, but I do give them credit. They did have the right people win here. Becky Lynch, that's who they should have went with. Seth Rollins, that's who they should have went with. So for the second year in a row, we had good Rumble winners. And Brock Lesnar and Finn Balor was good. Charlotte versus Asuka was good. Sasha Banks and Ronda Rousey was decent. I just really thought the Rumble matches really lacked here. I think the whole Nia Jax thing at the end of the men's Rumble really ruined it for a lot of people and just kind of left a stale taste in their mouth. But overall, it's not a bad pay-per-view at all. I'd say it's decent, and we had some pretty good matches on here. And the results were good as well, like I said. Next up, we have Survivor Series 2019. Normally, this is my favorite pay-per-view of the year. I think this is the first time in a while it wasn't. So, I thought it was good, though. We had your NXT versus SmackDown versus Raw, your tri-branded pay-per-view here. And we had the triple threat elimination matches, which I thought were actually pretty good. We had the great Pete Dunne versus Adam Cole NXT Championship match. You had The Fiend versus Daniel Bryan, which was, I don't know. I was not a fan. We had Brock Lesnar and Rey Mysterio, no holds barred match, which I think you could have made a really good match out of this. It was just obviously one of those booking matches. I was really hoping they would do like a good 12-minute back and forth here. That big underdog story. But no. And, had a good triple threat mid-card title showdown, guess you want to call it. So, the main event was awful, and, that's what kind of killed the pay-per-view for a lot of people, but I still think it was, top to bottom, a good pay-per-view. So, next up we have WrestleMania 35. I was not a fan of it when it ended. I did go back and, watch a lot of it a second time. And I think the second viewing I did like it more. AJ Styles and Randy Orton, that was always a match I wanted to see, which was decent. You had Kofi Kingston versus Daniel Bryan. Huge match here. This should have been the main event. And that was a big problem I had with it. The main event, Charlotte, Becky Lynch, and Ronda Rousey, it wasn't that great of a match. It really wasn't. And then, of course, we had, Demon Balor versus Bobby Lashley. We had Rey Mysterio and Samoa Joe ending in, 9 seconds or some shit. That's the problem with WrestleMania. I feel like there's too many matches. And then, Samoa Joe and Rey Mysterio, that's awesome. I would love to see that for real, at a WrestleMania. So, it's WrestleMania has become over-cluttered mess a lot of the times, and then you have a few gems in there. Seth Rollins and Brock Lesnar was a disappointing match. I was really expecting good back and forth there. But, it is what it is. It's not the worst WrestleMania of all time by any means. Next up, a surprising addition to the list here. At number 2 is Extreme Rules. I really thought this was kind of an improvement over this bad pay-per-view streak we were having, where it felt like we'll never get a good pay-per-view ever again. But, we had kind of your big matchup here, we of course had The Undertaker and Roman Reigns teaming up. So that was actually surprisingly good versus Shane McMahon and Drew McIntyre. And it was kind of a way for Undertaker to redeem himself for Super Saudi Shit Show. We had Kofi Kingston against Samoa Joe. AJ Styles versus Ricochet for the United States Championship, which I felt like never quite hit third gear, but it was still a decent match there. You know, overall, this was just a huge improvement over the pay-per-view matches we had been seeing. You know, or just the whole pay-per-views of themselves. Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins teaming up against Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans. It sounds awful on paper, but it actually turned out to be better than expected. And then we had Brock Lesnar cashing in at the very end of the night to win the WWE Universal title. So yeah, surprisingly, really decent pay-per-view. And then number one, this one, I didn't really see it being anything else. SummerSlam. This was the only pay-per-view this year that I actually had a pretty good time with and actually had a pretty good feeling afterwards. It kind of got you that pumped up feeling. We had The Fiend versus Finn Balor, which was an amazing moment. That is something I will always remember watching live. We had Goldberg versus Dolph Ziggler, which was actually better than expected. You know, the main event, we had Brock Lesnar versus Seth Rollins in a pretty good main event. You know, that to me is what the WrestleMania match should have been. Charlotte and Trish Stratus. This was my favorite match of the night. You know, I'm a huge Charlotte fan, and Trish Stratus is, of course, one of the greatest of all time. So this was a dream match, and I actually really had a fun time with this match. You know, with this pay-per-view, it felt more fun than... You know, WWE's not fun anymore. It's just not. They're so corporate. They're so... You know, obviously they're a publicly traded company. They're PG. They're not fun. You know, it's CM Punk. Like an example, CM Punk, when he tweeted out that he shit his pants, they made him take it down. They're just not fun. They're not... It's just... Like I said, I grew up at a very different time. But this one I actually had a good time with. So, I really gave WWE credit in my review for this one. So it ended up being a really good pay-per-view. So be sure to give me your list down below, what you would kind of rank these pay-per-views. And I hope you guys enjoyed. For now, this has been the DV Freak. Peace out.